Arthur Sterling believed he was discarding trash when he offered his daughter, Era, to the Mafia to settle the debts of his crumbling real estate empire. Viewing her size as a defect and calling her the heavy burden, he intended to punish her by handing her over to Lorenzo Moretti, the feared monster of Chicago. But Sterling's calculation was fatal. He failed to realize that the criminal underworld measures value in loyalty rather than pounds. Where a father saw a victim to be discarded, the mob boss saw a force to be reckoned with, setting the stage for the rejected daughter to rise as the queen of the underworld. The air in the private study of the Sterling estate smelled of stale scotch and impending ruin. It was a smell Era Sterling had grown up with, woven into the expensive Persian rugs and the mahogany bookshelves that lined the walls of her father's mansion in Lake Forest, Illinois. Era stood by the window, her reflection ghosting against the dark glass. She adjusted the hem of her dress, a shapeless, navy blue sack her stepmother Beatrice had bought for her. "To hide your situation," Beatrice had said with a tight, pitying smile. Era was a size 20 in a family that worshipped size 0. She was soft where they were hard, quiet where they were loud, and brilliant where they were foolish. "Arthur, be reasonable," a voice rumbled from the leather armchair. Era turned. Her father, Arthur Sterling, was sweating through his bespoke suit. Opposite him sat a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with silver hair and a scar running through his left eyebrow. This was Giovanni the Butcher Romano, the consigliere to the Moretti crime family. "I don't have the liquidity, Gio," Arthur pleaded, pouring himself another drink. His hands shook. "The market in the South Loop is crashing. Just give me another month." "You've had 6 months, Arthur," Giovanni said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "The Don is losing patience. You owe us $4 million. That's not a debt we write off." Era watched, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew the books better than her father did. She handled the household accounts, hidden away in the attic, balancing ledgers that Arthur was too drunk to read. She knew he didn't have the money. He had spent it on Beatrice's jewelry and bad bets in Macau. "I have assets!" Arthur shouted, his desperation turning into a shrill whine. "We don't want your underwater properties," Giovanni said, standing up. He checked his watch, a Patek Philippe that probably cost more than Era's car. "Lorenzo is coming personally tonight. He wants payment, or he wants blood." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lorenzo Moretti, the capo dei capi, the man they whispered about in the Chicago counting houses. They said he took over the family at 28 after his father was gunned down, and he had turned the chaotic violence of the outfit into a cold, corporate machine. He was 32 now, and rumor had it he had never smiled in his life. The sound of tires crunching on gravel outside broke the silence. Heavy doors slammed. Arthur's face went pale grey. He looked at Ira, his eyes narrowing. It wasn't a look of fatherly concern. It was the look of a trapped rat assessing a piece of cheese. "Era," Arthur said, his voice trembling. "Come here." She stepped forward, her thighs rubbing together, the fabric of her dress swishing. She hated the sound. She hated the way her father looked at her chin, then her stomach, with undisguised disgust. "You've always wanted to be useful, haven't you?" Arthur hissed, grabbing her wrist. His grip was wet and weak. "You've been eating me out of house and home for 24 years. Maybe it's time you paid your way." The double doors of the study burst open. 2 men in dark suits entered first, securing the room. Then he walked in. Lorenzo Moretti was not what Era expected. He wasn't the bulky, shouting brute her father was. He was tall, lean but broad-shouldered, wearing a black suit that fit him with surgical precision. His face was sharp angles and dark stubble, his eyes the colour of burnt espresso. He didn't look at Arthur. He looked at the room, analysing threats. Then his eyes landed on Era. She wanted to shrink, to fold herself into a singularity and disappear, but she held her chin up. It was the one thing she had. Pride. She wouldn't let these men see her cry. "Mr. Sterling," Lorenzo said. His voice was a low baritone, smooth like aged whiskey, but with a burn on the way down. "Giovanni tells me you are empty-handed." Not empty-handed," Arthur stammered. He pulled Era forward, shoving her toward the hitman. She stumbled, barely catching her balance. "I offer a trade," Arthur said, breathless. "A union. To settle the debt." Lorenzo looked at Arthur, then at Era. He didn't sneer. He didn't laugh. He just tilted his head. "You are offering me your daughter? She's distinct," Arthur babbled. "She comes from good stock. My first wife was a beauty. Era is, well, she's sturdy. She can cook. She can clean. She's untouched. Take her. Marry her. Use her. I don't care. Just wipe the ledger clean." Era felt the bile rise in her throat. Sturdy. Like a table. Like a draft horse. Her own father was selling her like cattle by the pound to save his own skin. The room went silent. Giovanni looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. Even the Mafia had codes, and selling your child was generally looked down upon. Lorenzo took a step closer to Era. He was close enough that she could smell him. Sandalwood, gunpowder, and rain. He towered over her, but he didn't loom. He inspected her face, ignoring her body entirely. "Do you agree to this?" Lorenzo asked her directly. Era looked at her father. Arthur was mouthing the words, "Say yes or I die." She looked back at Lorenzo. "If I say no, you kill him?" "Likely," Lorenzo admitted. "And if I say yes? Then you belong to me. You leave this house. You never return." Era looked around the room. The cold books, the empty scotch bottles, the father who saw her only as a caloric expense. "I have packed my bags already," Era lied, her voice steady. "I knew he would sell me eventually. I just didn't know the buyer." Lorenzo's eyes flared with something. Surprise? Respect? "Done," Lorenzo said. He turned to Arthur. "Your debt is transferred to her. She is the collateral. If she leaves, you die. If she is unhappy, you die. If you speak to her again, you die." Arthur slumped in relief, not even hearing the conditions, just happy to be alive. "Take her. She's heavy lifting, Moretti. Good luck." Lorenzo didn't look back at Arthur. He extended a hand to Era. It was a large hand, rough with calluses. "Let's go, Era," he said. She stared at his hand. No one had offered her a hand in years. She took it. His grip was warm and firm. He didn't pull her. He guided her. As they walked out of the mansion, leaving her father celebrating his survival, Era realized something terrifying. She wasn't walking to her death. She was walking out of her prison. The drive to the city was suffocatingly quiet. Era sat in the back of the armored SUV, separated from the driver by a partition. Lorenzo sat next to her, scrolling through messages on a secure tablet. Era sat with her hands folded in her lap, trying to make herself as small as possible. The leather seat was plush, but she felt like an intruder in a world of sleek lines and hard surfaces. Every time the car went over a bump, she felt the jiggle of her arms, the softness of her waist. She waited for the insults. Fat cow, whale, useless. "Stop it," Lorenzo said. Era jumped. "Stop what?" "Thinking so loud. It's giving me a headache." He didn't look up from his tablet. "I apologize," she whispered. "I'm just waiting for you to tell me what the arrangement is. Am I a maid? A cook? A hostage? Lorenzo finally locked the tablet and turned to her. The street lights from the I-90 highway flickered across his face, casting long shadows. "You are my wife," he said simply. Era let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Please." "I have mirrors, Mr. Moretti. Men like you don't marry women like me. You marry models, women who can fit into sample sizes. My father gave me to you as a joke, a punishment." Lorenzo turned his body fully toward her. The intensity of his gaze made her breath hitch. "Your father," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping an octave, "is a pig. A man who judges value by surface area is a man who goes bankrupt, which, coincidentally, he is." He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. He tossed it into her lap. "Put it on." Ira opened the box. Inside was a diamond ring. It wasn't a gaudy, massive rock meant to show off wealth. It was an Asher cut, vintage, elegant, and understated. "It belonged to my grandmother," Lorenzo said. "She was a big woman. She killed 3 men who tried to assassinate my grandfather. She was the most feared woman in Sicily." Era stared at the ring. It was beautiful. She slid it onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "How?" she asked, looking up at him. "I had your file," Lorenzo said. "I don't make deals I haven't researched. I knew your father was going to offer you. I knew he had been mentally abusing you since your mother died. I knew you run the finances for his shell companies because I saw the sudden improvement in his tax laundering 3 years ago. Arthur is too stupid to do that math. That was you." Era's mouth fell open. You knew? "I need a wife, Era. The commission is pressuring me to settle down to show stability. But I don't need a vapid socialite who spends my money and leaks my secrets to the press. I need a partner. I need someone who understands numbers, silence, and loyalty. I need someone who has been burned by the world enough to want to burn it back." He leaned in closer. "I didn't take you as punishment. I took you as an asset. Do not disappoint me." The car slowed down. They were pulling up to a massive penthouse building in the Gold Coast district. "One rule," Lorenzo said, as the driver opened the door. "Yes?" "In my house, you eat. You do not skip meals. You do not apologize for taking up space. You are a Moretti now. We take up all the space we want." Era felt a strange sensation in her chest. It wasn't fear anymore. It was the ignition of a spark. As she stepped out of the car, the wind off Lake Michigan whipped her hair. She looked up at the penthouse. This was a cage, yes, but it was a cage at the top of the world. And for the first time in her life, the man holding the key wasn't looking at her with disgust. He was looking at her with expectation. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel. The floors were marble, the furniture Italian leather, and the view of Chicago was worth more than Era's life. For the first 2 weeks, Era barely saw Lorenzo. He was a ghost, leaving before dawn and returning after she had gone to sleep. She was left in the care of Mrs. Higgins, a stern housekeeper who cooked meals that were terrified of calories, salads without dressing, poached chicken, steamed broccoli. Era assumed this was Lorenzo's way of fixing her without saying it. On the 3rd Friday, Lorenzo came home early. It was 7 p.m. Era was sitting at the dining table, picking at a plate of dry arugula. Lorenzo walked in, loosening his tie. He stopped dead when he saw her plate. His eyebrows drew together. "What is that?" "Dinner," Era said softly. "Mrs. Higgins!" Lorenzo roared. The sound echoed off the high ceilings. The elderly housekeeper scurried in from the kitchen. "Yes, sir?" "Why is my wife eating rabbit food?" "Well, sir," Mrs. Higgins stammered, glancing at Era with a judgmental sniff. "Mr. Sterling always gave specific instructions for his daughter's diet. I assumed," "You assumed," Lorenzo said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Did I give you instructions?" "No, sir, but you are fired. Get out." Era stood up, knocking her chair back. "Lorenzo, you can't fire her for that. She disrespected you." Lorenzo cut her off. "She looked at you and made a decision based on your father's prejudices. I don't tolerate prejudice in my house." He looked at the housekeeper. "Leave, now." Mrs. Higgins fled. Lorenzo walked into the kitchen. Ira heard pots banging, the fridge opening. A moment later, the smell of garlic and butter wafted out. He returned 20 minutes later with 2 bowls of carbonara. Real carbonara with guanciale and heavy pecorino cheese. He set one in front of her and one in front of himself. "Eat," he commanded. Ira hesitated. I shouldn't. The carbs." Lorenzo took a bite, watching her. "My enemies want to kill me, Ira. The FBI wants to arrest me. The IRS wants to audit me. I have enough people telling me what I can and cannot do. I will not have my own dinner table become a battlefield. Eat the pasta." She took a bite. It was rich, salty, and comforting. She took another. For the first time in years, she ate without guilt, because the man across from her wasn't counting her chews. "I need your help," Lorenzo said suddenly, wiping his mouth with a napkin. Era paused. "With what?" He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. He slid them across the table. "There is a leak in my organization. Money is bleeding out of the shipping docks in Newark. My accountants say it's just overhead. I think they're lying." Era wiped her hands and opened the file. Her demeanor changed instantly. She wasn't the shy, overweight girl anymore. She was a mathematician. Her eyes scanned the columns. "Here," she said within 2 minutes, pointing a manicured nail at a sub-column. "Fuel surcharges. They're inflating the fuel costs by 12% and routing the difference to a shell vendor listed as maintenance. See the recurring payments? They match the dates of the fuel spikes exactly." Lorenzo stared at the paper, then at her. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It transformed him, making him look 5 years younger and infinitely more dangerous. "You found in 2 minutes what my team has missed for 2 months, he murmured. "Your team is looking for theft," Era said, her voice gaining strength. "I'm looking for patterns. Numbers have a rhythm, Lorenzo. When someone lies, the rhythm breaks." Lorenzo stood up and walked around the table. He stopped behind her chair. He placed his hands on her shoulders. His thumbs dug into her soft flesh, not painfully, but possessively. "You are dangerous, Era," he whispered into her ear. "I like it." He dropped a kiss on the top of her head. It was brief, but it burned. "Get some rest. Tomorrow you're coming to the office. I'm firing my lead accountant and you're taking his desk." I can't go to your office," Era panicked. "People will stare. They'll ask why the Don married her." "Let them stare," Lorenzo said, walking toward the bedroom. "Lions do not concern themselves with the opinions of sheep. And you, Bella Mea, are a lioness. You just don't know how to roar yet." But the domestic peace was not to last. As Ira settled into her new role, reviewing the dark finances of the Moretti Empire, she found something else in the ledgers. Something that wasn't about the docks in Newark. It was a payment. A monthly recurring payment of $50,000 going to an account in the Cayman Islands. The beneficiary name was obscured, but the routing number was familiar. It was her father's private account. Lorenzo wasn't just paying off her father's debt, he was paying her father allowance. Why? If Lorenzo owned her, why was he paying Arthur Sterling? Unless the deal wasn't about debt at all. Unless Arthur had sold her for something far worse than money. Era closed the ledger, her hands trembling. She had to know the truth. But in a house full of secrets, the truth was usually the thing that got you killed. Era did not hide in the penthouse. 2 days after finding the suspicious payments to her father, she walked into the headquarters of Moretti Global Logistics, the legitimate face of Lorenzo's empire, wearing a suit that cost more than her father's car. It was black, tailored to her curves, not hiding them. She wore heels that clicked like gunshots against the marble floor of the lobby. The receptionist, a young woman named Kerry with overly filled lips, looked up and smirked. "Deliveries are in the back, sweetie." Era stopped. She placed her hands on the desk, leaning in. "I am Mrs. Moretti, and if you ever address me as sweetie again, I will have you reassigned to the warehouse in Gary, Indiana. Do we understand each other?" Kerry went pale. Oh God, I'm so sorry. Mr. Moretti didn't say—" "Mr. Moretti doesn't speak for me," Era said, walking past her to the elevator. When she reached the executive floor, the silence was instant. A room full of men, captains, soldiers, and forensic accountants, stopped talking. They looked at the heavy-set woman walking toward the Don's office. Lorenzo was in a meeting with his top lieutenants. When Ira opened the door without knocking, Giovanni reached for his waistband. He stopped when he saw who it was. "Era?" Lorenzo stood up, a frown marring his face. "I told you to stay at the apartment today." "And I decided the apartment was boring," she said, dropping a heavy file onto his desk. "We need to talk about the distribution nodes in Jersey. You're being bled dry by the union reps." One of the captains, a man named Paulie the Nose, chuckled. "Boss, why is the little lady worrying about union reps? Shouldn't she be worrying about, I don't know, lunch?" The room went dead silent. Lorenzo moved so fast it was a blur. He grabbed Paulie by the back of the neck and slammed his face into the mahogany table. Crack. "My wife," Lorenzo whispered to the room, while Paulie whimpered, blood pooling under his nose, "is the only person in this room who knows how to read a balance sheet without moving her lips. If she speaks, you listen. If she insults you, you say thank you. Are we clear?" "Clear, boss," the men chorused. "Get out," Lorenzo commanded. They scrambled, dragging Paulie with them. When they were alone, Lorenzo turned to Era. The violence in his eyes faded, replaced by that simmering heat. "You have a flair for the dramatic, Kara." "I learned from the best," she said. She didn't back down. "Lorenzo, I saw the ledger, the personal one." Lorenzo stiffened. He walked to the window, looking out over the Chicago skyline. "You weren't supposed to see that." $50,000 a month to Arthur Sterling, Era said, her voice shaking slightly. "Why? You own me. You don't need to pay him a lease. Why are you giving him money?" "It's not a lease," Lorenzo said, his back to her. "Then what is it?" "It's silence." "Silence about what?" Era demanded. "My mother? My childhood. What could he possibly know that you would pay for?" Lorenzo turned around. "He knows where you are. The money is a bribe to keep him away. It's a recurring payment that stops solely if he approaches you." Ira felt a chill. "You're paying him to not be my father?" "I'm paying him to let you heal," Lorenzo said, walking over to her. He took her hands. "Arthur breaks things, Era. He broke your spirit. He broke your confidence. If he comes near you, he will try to break you again, to prove he still has power. I am buying you time to build your armor." Era looked into his dark eyes. She wanted to believe him. It was a romantic notion, the beast paying off the wicked father to protect the beauty. But the numbers didn't add up. 50,000 was too high for simple avoidance. Arthur was desperate. He would have stayed away for 5,000. "You're lying," Era whispered, "or you're not telling me the whole truth." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "Trust me, Era. Do not dig into this. Arthur is a parasite. If you cut him open, you'll only find disease." He kissed her forehead, ending the conversation. "Now, tell me about the union reps in Jersey." Era let it drop for the moment. She spent the next month revolutionizing the Moretti finances. She found shell companies within shell companies. She fired 3 corrupt accountants. She saved the family nearly $6 million in 4 weeks. They started calling her La Contessa di Ferro, the Iron Countess. But at night, while Lorenzo slept, Era couldn't stop thinking about the payments. She accessed her father's bank records, something she had learned to do years ago. The money Lorenzo sent wasn't staying in Arthur's account. It was being immediately wired to a third party, a secure account in Switzerland. Holder name, Obsidian Consulting. Arthur wasn't keeping the money. He was a middleman. Lorenzo wasn't paying Arthur to stay away. Lorenzo was paying someone else through Arthur. Era realized with a sinking heart that her husband, the most powerful man in Chicago, was being blackmailed, and her father was the bagman. The annual policeman's ball was the height of hypocrisy in Chicago. It was where the politicians, the police brass, and the organized crime families rubbed elbows under the guise of charity. It was neutral ground. It was also Era's public debut. "You don't have to go," Lorenzo said, watching her from the doorway of her dressing room. He looked regal in a tuxedo, but his eyes were anxious. "They will be cruel, the press, the other wives." Era stood before the mirror. She wore a custom-made gown of deep emerald velvet. It was off the shoulder, showcasing her creamy skin. It hugged her waist and flowed down like liquid money. She wore the Asher diamond on her finger and a necklace of emeralds that Lorenzo had gifted her that morning. She applied a coat of blood-red lipstick. "Let them look, Lorenzo. I'm done hiding in the attic." She turned to him. "Do I look like a victim?" Lorenzo walked over, his eyes tracing her silhouette. "You look like a queen who is about to order an execution." "Good." The arrival at the Palmer house. Hilton was a frenzy of flashbulbs. When Lorenzo stepped out, the cameras clicked. When he helped Era out, the clicking stopped for a split second, then resumed with frantic intensity. They had expected a waif. They got a fortress. Era walked with her head high, her hand on Lorenzo's arm. She felt the stares. She heard the whispers. Look at her size. How did she land him? Must be a political marriage. Inside the ballroom, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Era navigated the room with surprising grace. She spoke fluent Italian to the visiting delegates, shocking them. She discussed market trends with the city comptroller, correcting him on the municipal bond rates until he looked like a schoolboy. Lorenzo watched her from across the room, a glass of scotch in his hand, a look of unmasked pride on his face. Then, the shark circled. Sophia De Luca, the daughter of the rival De Luca crime family, approached Era. Sophia was everything Era was not: tall, stick-thin, blonde, and cruel. She wore a silver dress that looked like chain mail. "Well," Sophia purred, holding a flute of champagne. "I heard Lorenzo got married. I assumed it was a rumor. He usually has higher standards." The women around them tittered. Era took a sip of her sparkling water. She didn't flinch. "Hello, Sophia. Lovely dress. It must be very efficient for filtering out your personality." Sophia's smile faltered. "Cute. Tell me, does Lorenzo charge you by the pound for the rent? Or does he just use you for shade in the summer?" The insult was loud. Heads turned. The room went quiet. Lorenzo started to move toward them, his face darkening, but Era held up a hand. "Stop." Era took a step closer to Sophia. She loomed over the other woman. "You know Sophia," Era said, her voice projecting clearly. "I was looking at the DeLuca financials recently. Interesting reading. It seems your father's concrete business is leveraged to the hilt. You're 3 months behind on your loans to the union." Sophia's eyes widened. "That's a lie." "Is it?" Era smiled, and it was a terrifying expression. "You're wearing a dress from the 2023 collection because you couldn't afford the new season. Your shoes are resoled. And your father is currently begging the triads for a loan at 40% interest just to keep the lights on." Era leaned in, whispering loud enough for the circle to hear. "I don't need to be skinny, Sophia. I own the bank that holds your mortgage. Be careful, or I'll foreclose on your house and turn it into a pantry." The circle of socialites gasped. Sophia turned bright red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She turned and fled the ballroom. Era turned back to the room, raised her glass, and took a sip. Lorenzo was beside her in a second. He gripped her waist. "Remind me never to cross you." "Too late," she murmured. "Well, well. My little girl, playing the heavy." The voice came from behind them. It was a voice that made Ira's blood turn to ice. Arthur Sterling stood there. He looked terrible. His suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot, his skin clammy. He smelled of gin and desperation. "Arthur," Lorenzo said, stepping between Ira and her father, "you are violating the agreement. Get out." "I have new terms," Arthur slurred. He looked at Era with a mix of hatred and hunger. "Look at you, all dressed up in Moretti diamonds. You think you're special now? You're just a pig in a silk sheet." "Leave, Arthur," Era said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled. "I want more," Arthur shouted, drawing the attention of the entire room. 50,000 isn't enough. Not for what I know, not for the secret." Lorenzo grabbed Arthur's lapel. "One more word, and you don't leave this room alive." "Tell her!" Arthur screamed, spit flying. "Tell her why you really bought her. Tell her about the night her mother died." The room was deadly silent. The music had stopped. Era froze. "What?" Arthur laughed, a manic, broken sound. "He didn't buy you for debt, Era. He bought you because he owes me. Your precious Lorenzo was the one driving the car. He killed your mother." Time seemed to stop. Era felt the floor tilt. Her mother had died in a hit-and-run accident 12 years ago. The driver was never found. She looked at Lorenzo. She waited for him to deny it. She waited for him to kill Arthur for the lie. But Lorenzo didn't move. He didn't speak. His face was a mask of pure, agonizing guilt. "You," Era whispered, stepping back. "You?" "Era," Lorenzo said, reaching for her. "Let me explain." "It's true," Arthur cackled. "He was a rookie kid, driving a getaway car for his father. He ran her off the road. He's been paying me for years to keep it quiet. But now I want half the empire." Lorenzo's hand moved. A gun appeared from his tuxedo jacket. Bang! Arthur Sterling dropped to the floor, a hole in the center of his forehead. Screams erupted. The ballroom descended into chaos. Security swarmed. Lorenzo didn't look at the dead body. He looked at Ira. "Era, listen to me." She looked at the man she was falling in love with, the man who had given her confidence, who had fed her, who had defended her, and she looked at the man who had killed her mother. "Don't touch me," she screamed. She turned and ran. She ran through the crowd, ignoring the chaos, ignoring the blood on the floor. She ran out of the hotel into the cold Chicago night, with the realization that her fairy tale was actually a horror story. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through Era's velvet gown like knives, but she was too numb to feel the cold. She had kicked off her heels blocks ago, Running barefoot through the alleyways of downtown Chicago until her feet bled, she found refuge in a 24-hour internet cafe in a rundown part of the South Side, a place where people didn't ask questions and the smell of stale cigarette smoke covered the scent of expensive perfume. She used the emergency cash she had sewn into the lining of her dress, a trick she learned from reading spy novels, the only friends she'd had growing up. She bought a burner phone and a hoodie from a patron, wrapping herself in the oversized fabric to hide the emerald dress. Arthur was dead. Her father was dead. Lorenzo had killed him. But the words Arthur screamed echoed in her mind. He killed your mother. Era sat in the back corner of the cafe, staring at a flickering computer screen. She should be calling the police. She should be running to the FBI. But old habits died hard. When faced with chaos, Ira Sterling turned to logic. She turned to numbers. She logged into the cloud server she had set up weeks ago, a mirror of the Moretti mainframe. She needed to know the truth. If Lorenzo was a monster, the numbers would prove it. She dug into the archives from 12 years ago, the date of her mother's death. August 14th. She found the police report, hit and run. Driver unknown. Then she found the internal Moretti cleanup file. It was encrypted, but Era had the master key, Lorenzo's birthday. He was sentimental after all. She opened the file. There were photos of the car, a twisted heap of metal, and there was a driver's log. Driver, Fabio Moretti, the former Don. Passenger, Lorenzo Moretti, age 20. Incident, Fabio Moretti intoxicated, struck civilian vehicle. Passenger Lorenzo Moretti moved driver to passenger seat to take the blame if police arrived, but Fabio insisted they flee. Era stopped breathing. Lorenzo hadn't been driving. His father was. Lorenzo had been in the car, yes. He had witnessed it. But he hadn't killed her mother. He had spent 12 years carrying the guilt of his father's sin. He had paid Arthur not to hide his own crime, but to hide the shame of his father's cowardice. Arthur knew. Arthur had known the whole time that Lorenzo was innocent of the act itself, but guilty by association, and Arthur had twisted that knife to bleed Lorenzo dry. He didn't kill her, Ira whispered to the empty room. He protected the family. It was a warped Mafia morality, but it wasn't murder. Suddenly, her screen flickered. A message box popped up. "I see you, Mrs. Moretti." Era froze. She hadn't used a traceable login. "How?" "You are looking at the Obsidian file. The message typed itself out." "Smart girl. But you're looking at the old logs. Look at the withdrawals from today." Era's fingers flew across the keyboard. She checked the bank accounts she had flagged earlier. The Obsidian account, the one Arthur was laundering money through, was being drained. Right now, millions of dollars were moving, but Arthur was dead. He couldn't be moving the money. Someone else had access. She traced the IP address of the transfer. It wasn't coming from the outside. It was coming from the penthouse, from the secure server room. Only 2 people had access to that room, besides Lorenzo. One was dead. The other was Giovanni. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Giovanni, the consigliere, the man who had pressured Arthur to sell her, the man who had been whispering in Lorenzo's ear for years. He was the leak. He was Obsidian. He had been using Arthur to drain the family funds, and when Arthur became a liability at the gala, Giovanni had let the situation explode, hoping Lorenzo would go down for murder. If Lorenzo was in police custody for shooting Arthur, and Era was missing, Giovanni would be the acting Don. He would have the money, the power, and the empire. Era stood up, knocking her chair over. She had to warn Lorenzo. He wasn't the villain of her story. He was the target. She grabbed the burner phone and dialed Lorenzo's private line. It rang once, twice. "Era?" His voice was ragged, desperate. He sounded like a man who had lost his soul. "Lorenzo, listen to me," she hissed, looking around the cafe. "It's Giovanni. He's the traitor. He's emptying the accounts." "Era, where are you? I don't care about the money. I need to know you're safe. The police are everywhere. I'm in a safe house on Wacker Drive, but I'm safe. I found the logs, Lorenzo. I know you didn't drive the car. I know it was your father." There was a heavy silence on the line. Then, a choked sound. "You know." "I know. And I know Giovanni is setting you up. He wanted you to kill Arthur. He wants the throne. Era, stay exactly where you are. Tell me the address. I'm coming for you. I'm at—" A hand clamped over her mouth, a heavy, leather-gloved hand. Era kicked and screamed, dropping the phone. It clattered to the floor. "Era!" Lorenzo's voice screamed from the tiny speaker. "Era!" She was spun around. Giovanni stood there, looking like a disappointed uncle, flanked by two massive enforcers. He was wearing a trench coat, holding a silenced pistol. "You really are too smart for your own good, ragazza," Giovanni sighed. "I told Arthur you were useless. I was wrong. You're incredibly dangerous." He stomped on the phone, crushing it. "Bring her," Giovanni ordered. "We need leverage to make Lorenzo walk into the slaughterhouse." The warehouse smelled of brine, rusted iron, and the decay of the Calumet River. It was a cavernous, hollowed-out skeleton of Chicago's industrial past, located deep in the South Side where the streetlights were broken and the police patrols were scarce. Era sat in the center of the vast concrete floor, her wrists bound tightly behind her back with heavy-duty industrial zip ties. The plastic bit into her skin, cutting off circulation. But the physical pain was distant. The real agony was the terror thumping in her chest, not for herself, but for the man she knew was coming. Giovanni paced in front of her, his silhouette jagged against the moonlight streaming through the high, broken windows. The polished, grandfatherly consigliere was gone. In his place was a man unraveled by decades of envy. He held a silenced Sig Sauer, the metal glinting in the dim light. "He's a fool, your husband," Giovanni spat, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls. "He thinks he can run an empire with spreadsheets and mercy. The Moretti family was built on fear. I built it on fear alongside his father, while Lorenzo was still wetting the bed." "He built it on loyalty," Era said, her voice surprisingly steady. She shifted in the chair, testing the bindings. They were tight, but the chair was old wood. If she could find a splinter, a nail, anything. "That's why his men love him. That's why they fear you, but they don't respect you." Giovanni stopped pacing. He walked over to her, grabbing her chin with a bruising grip. "Respect? Respect is a currency for the poor. I want power, and tonight I get it all. I have the money. I have the leverage, and in 5 minutes I will have the corpse of the last Moretti. He won't walk into a trap," Era lied, though she knew he would. "Oh, he will," Giovanni grinned, his teeth yellowed in the shadows. "Because of his fatal flaw. He actually cares about the livestock." He gestured to her body with the barrel of the gun. "Arthur was right about one thing. You are a heavy burden, a weakness. Lorenzo is coming to die for a woman who was sold to him like a piece of furniture." Suddenly, the heavy rolling doors at the far end of the warehouse began to rumble. The sound was like thunder. Giovanni signaled to the shadows. 12 men emerged from behind crates and pillars. They were mercenaries, not family soldiers. Men paid to kill without questions. They raised their assault rifles, aiming at the widening gap of the door. Giovanni pressed the muzzle of his gun against Era's temple. The cold steel made her shiver. "Don't blink," Giovanni whispered. "You don't want to miss the widow-making." The doors hit the top of the frame with a clang. The opening was a rectangle of fog and night. And then Lorenzo walked in. He was alone. He wore a tuxedo shirt, the bow tie undone, the top buttons ripped open. He had discarded his jacket. His hands were empty, held out to his sides to show he was unarmed. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. With the wind whipping his dark hair and his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying fury, he looked like a god of war. He stopped 20 yards away. "I'm here, Gio," Lorenzo called out. His voice was calm, possessing a dangerous stillness that made the mercenaries shift uneasily. "Let her go." "You have a lot of nerve coming here empty-handed," Giovanni shouted, using Era as a human shield. "Where is my backup? Where are your captains?" "I didn't bring them," Lorenzo said, taking a slow step forward. "This is family business. I don't let outsiders see us bleed." "We aren't family!" Giovanni screamed, the bitterness exploding out of him. "I was a servant to your drunk father. I cleaned up his hits, I hid his sins, and when he died, he gave the crown to you, a boy who thinks he's better than the blood on his hands." "I never thought I was better," Lorenzo said, his eyes locking onto Era's. He was sending her a silent message. "Be ready." "I just thought we could be something other than butchers." "Well," Giovanni cocked the hammer of the gun, "you thought wrong. Say goodbye to your wife." "Era," Lorenzo said softly. "Down." It wasn't a request, it was a command. Era didn't hesitate. She threw her entire body weight backward. The old wooden chair tipped, crashing hard onto the concrete. Her head slammed against the floor, stars bursting in her vision. But the movement took her head out of the line of fire. Boom! The warehouse windows exploded inward. Lorenzo hadn't come alone. He hadn't brought the captains. He had brought the ghosts. Snipers positioned on the adjacent rooftops fired simultaneously, shattering the glass and dropping flashbang grenades onto the warehouse floor. The room erupted in blinding white light and a deafening concussive roar. "Kill him! Kill them all!" Giovanni shrieked, firing blindly into the smoke. Era was on her side, her ears ringing, the taste of blood in her mouth. The mercenaries were scrambling, their vision compromised. Lorenzo was moving. He dove behind a stack of shipping pallets, pulling 2 handguns from the waistband of his back. He hadn't been unarmed after all. He moved with lethal precision, a blur of motion in the strobe light chaos of the flashbangs. Bang! Bang! 2 mercenaries dropped. Era knew she couldn't just lie there. She was a sitting duck. She wiggled backward, scraping her arms against the rough floor, until she felt the sharp edge of a rusted metal bracket protruding from a crate. She gritted her teeth and sawed the thick plastic zip tie against the jagged metal. It sliced into her wrists. Warm blood trickled down her palms. She screamed internally but kept sawing. Snap! The plastic gave way. She was free. She ripped the ties off her ankles and scrambled to her feet. The firefight was intensifying. Bullets chipped the concrete around her. Giovanni had retreated behind a forklift, pinning Lorenzo down with suppressing fire. Lorenzo was outnumbered. He was good, but he was 1 man against 10. Era looked around frantically. She saw the electrical panel on the east pillar, the door hanging open. She remembered the schematics from the deed she had reviewed in the file. This warehouse was wired to the main city grid, but the transformer was old. She didn't run away. She ran toward the danger. "Era, get out!" Lorenzo roared from his cover, seeing her move. She ignored him. She grabbed a heavy iron crowbar from a workbench and sprinted to the electrical panel. Giovanni saw her. He swung his gun toward her. "You stupid cow!" he fired. The bullet whizzed past her ear, severing a lock of her hair. Era reached the panel. She didn't just flip the switch. She jammed the crowbar into the main bus bar, bridging the live connection. There was a massive shower of sparks, a sound like a cracking whip, and then the entire lighting rig of the warehouse surged to 200% brightness before exploding. The mercenaries, wearing night vision goggles to see through the smoke, screamed as the sudden flare blinded them completely. The warehouse plunged into total darkness. Silence. Then the sound of a single pair of footsteps. Hard. Deliberate. "Gio!" Lorenzo's voice came from the dark. "You missed." A single muzzle flash lit up the dark. Bang. Then another. Bang. Then silence again. Era stood by the pillar, her chest heaving, the smell of ozone and burnt plastic filling her nose. She couldn't see anything. "Lorenzo," she whispered, her voice trembling. A hand touched her shoulder. She flinched, raising the crowbar. "It's me," his low voice soothed her. The emergency lights flickered on, bathing the warehouse in a dull red glow. The mercenaries were gone, fled or incapacitated. Giovanni lay in the center of the room. He wasn't moving. Lorenzo stood before her. He was covered in dust, blood soaking through his white shirt, his face streaked with grime. He looked terrifying. He looked beautiful. He dropped his guns to the floor. The clang echoed like a church bell. He grabbed her, pulling her into him, with a force that knocked the wind out of her. His arms wrapped around her waist, his hands tangling in her hair, pressing her face into his neck. He was shaking. The monster of Chicago, the man who never flinched, was trembling uncontrollably. "I thought I lost you," he rasped, his voice breaking. When he said those things, "I thought you would run. I thought you would hate me." Era pulled back just enough to look at him. She cupped his face with her bloody hands, smearing red across his cheek. "I did run," she said, breathlessly. "I ran to the numbers. I checked the logs, Lorenzo. I know you didn't kill her. I know you took the blame for your father." Lorenzo closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against hers. "I was a coward. I let you believe the worst." "You were protecting the family," she said firmly. "But that family is dead. Giovanni is dead. Arthur is dead." "And the money is gone," Lorenzo said, opening his eyes. He looked exhausted. "Giovanni drained the operating accounts. We have nothing, Era. The properties, the liquid cash, it's all in the Caymans. I can't pay the men. I can't protect us. We have to leave the country tonight." Era stared at him. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. It wasn't the shy smile of the girl in the shapeless dress. It was the smile of a woman who had just checkmated the king. "Lorenzo," she said softly. "You really think I spent 2 hours in an internet cafe just reading old police reports?" He frowned. "What?" "Giovanni triggered the transfer," Era explained, her voice gaining strength. "He sent $50 million to an account in the Cayman Islands called Obsidian. But he didn't know I had administrative access to the routing protocols." Lorenzo stared at her, his mouth slightly open. "I didn't stop the transfer," Era continued, stepping closer to him. "I just changed the destination. I created a mirror account. The money isn't in the Caymans. It's in a secure, encrypted holding trust in Zurich." She tapped his chest, right over his heart. "The account holder's name is Mrs. Ira Moretti." Lorenzo looked at her as if he had never seen her before. The shock on his face slowly melted into awe. "You stole it back," he whispered. "I audited him," she corrected, with extreme prejudice. Lorenzo threw his head back and laughed. It was a ragged, loud, joyous sound that filled the empty warehouse. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around, burying his face in her neck. "My father called you punishment," Lorenzo growled against her skin. He was a fool. You are the greatest heist of my life. He set her down, but didn't let go. He wiped the blood from her cheek with his thumb. We don't have to run, he realized. With that capital, we can rebuild. We can purge the ranks. We can make it legitimate. We, Era repeated. Yes, we. Lorenzo took her hand, kissing the knuckles, right over the Asher-cut diamond that was still shining despite the grime. I don't want to rule alone, Ira. I never did. I want a partner. I want the Iron Countess. Sirens began to wail in the distance. The Chicago PD was finally responding to the noise. We need to go, Lorenzo said, guiding her toward the river dock where a sleek speedboat was waiting, its engine idling quietly. Ira stepped onto the boat, the wind whipping her torn velvet dress around her legs. She looked back at the warehouse, at the wreckage of her old life. She thought of her father, who had sold her by the pound. She thought of the society that had dismissed her because she didn't fit their mold. She looked at Lorenzo, who was untying the ropes, looking at her not as a burden, but as his salvation. He jumped in beside her and revved the engine. The boat shot out onto the dark water, heading toward the city skyline that glittered like diamonds on black velvet. Era sat back, feeling the spray of the lake on her face. She wasn't the fat daughter anymore. She wasn't the punishment. She wasn't the victim. She placed her hand on Lorenzo's knee. He covered it with his own, interlacing their fingers. She was the queen, and the king knew exactly what she was worth. And that is the story of Era and Lorenzo. In a world where women are often treated as pawns, Era proved that the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. She took the pain of her father's rejection and the weight of her own insecurities and forged them into armor. Lorenzo didn't save her. He simply handed her the weapon she needed to save herself. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and justice, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you found out your family was hiding a secret like Arthur's? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.